part 4 of End of the Line. Unused to being addressed, I activated a cantrip to make my voice sound hollow before I replied. Sergeant? I acknowledged him by his rank. Are we all going to die today? Most of you are already dead. Behind me, I heard a faint sound of leather scraping against stone and a telltale clink of climbing claws finding purchase in stone. Somebody was climbing up the side of the building. I turned to look around in a circle as I assessed the area. It was a death dealer who had been fitting about earlier and responsible for this killing spree. I could tell by the labored movements and ragged breath that she was seriously wounded and would probably die soon as well. She pulled herself onto the roof edge to lie prone, but it did nothing to indicate her proximity. I despised this war, but I had been told by both my mother and the Phantom Queen that when acting in my capacity as a harbinger of death, I should avoid saying or doing anything that could be construed as overly favoring one side over another.
I heard you can be reasoned with to spare some lives on occasion,
the hobgoblin continued. Her Majesty the Phantom Queen has been generous enough to permit me to exercise discretion in when I must collect what is due. But eventually, I'll meet with her, I replied.
Could you collect us at a later time?
The hobgoblin sergeant asked. I could, but why would I do that when I'm here now?
My wife and I want to start a family.
He pointed to the human spellcaster who was writhing in pain. You have destroyed numerous family lines and denied branch family and friends the material keepsakes and inheritance they are due in order to increase your personal wealth. I see no reason to think you should be granted an exception when the tables were overturned onto you. That could be interpreted as showing favor to Reslin's army.
Vera and I had no choice. Reslin's troops came through our city 3 months ago and rounded up the survivors, and we were recruited at sword point.
The hobgoblin sergeant continued.
At least, take me in her place instead.
Victims becoming oppressors was an all too familiar refrain in recent years, and one both Ender Reslin and Grablin Maddox were more than happy to orchestrate in their pursuit of domination. The hobgoblin's request to take him instead of her was also not that uncommon, but it was one I rarely entertain. More often than not, the request is a highly imbalanced proposition that weird itself prohibits me. Mixing the fate of the deceased with the still living dilutes both. It also muddles the Phantom Queen's ability to see the path an individual soul should be sent. But sometimes an individual's fate is already intermingled with another's fate and is yet still indistinguishable. In those instances, it is possible. Glimpsing the tangled life skin of the hobgoblin and his wife just now reminded me of an occasion shortly after I adopted this role. 6 adventurers had accidentally freed an air elemental and they were killed to the last in a poorly planned and horribly executed attempt to recapture it. They were dead when I arrived. Disappointed that I had missed the opportunity to grant a final request, I collected all of their souls and brought them to the Phantom Queen to sort. She permitted me to observe how she untangled their souls and even told me to return one to life. I gained an appreciation for her role in arbitrating soul distribution. Please allow me to do it, Stormcrow. The Shadow Elf had pulled themselves up onto the roof and was lying on their side. Or take them both. What's your name, Sergeant? I called down to the hobgoblin.
Ferox Zimlin,
the hobgoblin replied, turning back to his wife, who had cried out in pain once more. I give you my name, Dargadash Tython, and my life if you take those 2 butchers to the throne of the Morgan before sunset today, Stormcrow. I tilted my head curiously at the Shadow Elf. You are rather young to desire to part with your life. Yes, but you serve the Morgan also. If I give you my name before I die, this enticing clan will still live in spite of Indereslin. I immediately realized the strategic importance of the name and experienced a strangely pleasant taste of cinnamon and whiskey in my mouth as I absorbed the weird energies from her vengeance-fueled wrath. It was delicious, and a sudden desire to taste more from the shadow elf spurred my decision. I agree to your terms, Dargladash Sintython. I claim your name and your life in exchange for escorting Ferric Zinlim and his wife Vera to the Morgan by sunset today. As the shadow elf fell unconscious, I knelt down and touched the wound to send rejuvenating magic into her body and transfer a portion of the injury to myself. However, she remained unconscious. I extracted a spool of white thread from my component pouch and tied one end around the shadow elf's neck, then wrapped a single loop around the thumbs and fingers of my left hand. A reddish-brown nimbus of light outlined her body, drifted into the thread and flowed its length into my fingers, and I momentarily saw familiar darkness. The shadow elf child was in the voidscape between life and death, and I saw and experienced her life just as she was mentally reliving in this moment. The passage of real time slowed infinitesimally. Everything Darlagadak Sintython knew and experienced was now mine, but with my own level of realization and understanding, I knew how to turn Indereslin's victory here into the taste of bitter ashes in his mouth. I felt another surge of weird that came with the formal addition of a name. Using another's senses is always an initially disorientating sensation. But unlike accessing the senses of Mr. Raven, where my senses effectively turn off in favor of his, actually possessing someone for the first time is confusing due to simultaneously seeing, hearing, tasting, and feeling things, both in your own body as well as that of your host. I have read that it eventually becomes second nature to split your focus. I look forward to experimenting and testing that in the near future. We will both have to thank Kip next time I see him. From the satchel at my side, I retrieved a scroll and unrolled it, read the contents, and recited the celestial words to myself 3 times in my head before speaking it aloud. A white cloud formed around the shadow elf girl's body before dissipating. I extracted an elaborate curved box about 6 inches long that resembled a coffin from one of my pockets and set it on the ground. When I opened the box, it expanded into a coffin 6 feet long. I am not exceptionally strong, but I easily picked up the shadow elf and placed her into the coffin. I suppose I could say she is my child at this point, but without context, it creates unnecessary drama. Even now, I am still mentally segmenting events, accessing some of the immediate and more far-reaching consequences of my decision. And when I close the coffin, I shrink back down to the original size and I place it back in my pocket. Moments later, a column of mist rises from the ground, and I apparate next to the hobgoblin and the human. With one hand, I reached into a pocket and pulled out an envelope of baking soda and sprinkled it on the largest acid burns. I neutralized the exit acid. Unfortunately, she already contracted a blood infection and will die soon, I declared, and picked a few moon lilies growing alongside the road.